Sid was awoken by the sound of his alarm clock and stared at the words on the ceiling for a while. But he had no time to dream on. He had a train to catch, and so he forced himself out of bed and into the shower. As he hastily ate breakfast, he checked his backpack for the most important items. Then he swung it onto his back, grabbed his traveling hat, and left for the bus. As the double-decker took him to the central station, and he saw the city passing by the big window before him, that feeling of traveling took hold of him. Even though he was going somewhere he had gone many times before, for now, he would soon go on further, somewhere completely new. It should be easy for you to dream on. You're going to the Fusion next week, Maria had said to him yesterday. He just had to make sure to make the dream last during the time he would spend in that grey little town where everyone had long been harshly awoken by life. He arrived at the crystal central station that shimmered in his 3D glasses in 1,000 rainbows and took the escalator down deep into its bowels where his train was already waiting for him. Sid got in, sat down beside a window and saw the station passing by outside. After staring out the window for some time, Sid got out his laptop and began to copy his handwritten notes again. He got so lost in his work that he almost missed his stop. When the electronic bell began to sound and a mechanical voice informed him that they were approaching the station where he would have to change, he hastily stuffed his laptop into his backpack and stormed outside. The last few times he had undertaken this journey, he had always been stuck at this station because a few minutes of delay made him miss the small green train he had to take to his aunt's town. The train company that operated on this route was a private one, and they profited from every passenger who would end up frustrated over the fact that you could not rely on the big, partly state-owned company that had a monopoly on almost every other part of the country. But this time you could rely on them, and Sid made his change over into the small green wagon, where he sat down, facing into the direction they were going, looking forward to arriving at the ruinous central station of the small town. He was picked up at the grey building that was covered with fascist slogans and dirty graffiti by his grandfather and his little cousin Ben, who ran towards him as he got out of the train and stretched out his arms, demanding to be thrown into the air. They headed down to the building that was made up of precast concrete slabs, like so many houses in this part of the world. The facades had been covered with bright paint a few years after the reunification, but apart from that, nothing had changed. Inside, it was still as grey as before. Sid remembered a conversation he had once had with a student of architecture and history who studied the connections between the way houses were built and the political systems they existed in. She had told him that Jewish people had mostly hidden in buildings from the previous century during the Nazi regime, which erected houses with thin walls through which you can eavesdrop easily on your neighbors. The totalitarian regime that had preceded them apparently built with a similar concept. Today you might not be able to hear through the walls of modern buildings, but you could see through many of them, Sid realized as he thought of the central station of the city he had left a few hours ago. His grandmother was already waiting for them with lunch, and so they sat down at the small dinner table in the living room and began to eat. He had to tell them of his life in the city, and they listened in amazement.
Do you also have so many foreigners where you live in Berlin?
His grandfather asked. Well, yeah, although by now most of them aren't really foreigners anymore. They've been living there much longer than me, most of them in the second or third generation. His grandfather told him that he had read a book by a former politician that argued that Germany would end up being overrun by foreigners quite soon. He had found it in the local library, and when Sid tried to poke holes in its argumentation and began to defend it.
Well, it's all based on statistics, and a man knows what he's talking about. He was the senator of the interior in Berlin.
Sid tried to tell him that he shouldn't trust statistics too much, and that the claims the book made were even less factual and set in stone, since they were merely theories based on those statistics. Well, I am living in one of those neighborhoods where a lot of people have a different background, and I feel quite comfortable, Sid said, and they switched the topic. As they sat there in the small living room with the gray tapestry, Sid thought of the summers he had spent in this town. He had had to go on bike tours with his grandfather every day before noon, but apart from that, he had spent most of his time inside, reading, trying to ignore the old man yelling at his wife because she had fallen victim to another salvo of advertising and special offers that had begun to flood their mailbox since the world around them had changed so drastically. His grandfather mostly cut those commercials up into rectangular pieces, which he placed in the bathroom to use as toilet paper. A canny soul like his was not paired well with a wife that went through phases of reckless spending every once in a while. Sid remembered how he had once overheard his parents talking about her, that she had been in some kind of hospital, where she had beaten up the warden and tried to leave without permission. But throughout his childhood, he had never really known the reason why she was hospitalized every once in a while. He only got this information secondhand from conversations he overheard, since no one spoke to him directly, and he was too shy to ask. It was only when he began his psychology studies 2 years ago that he stumbled across the term manic depression. He found out that his grandmother had been suffering from it for many years, and he began to wonder whether he might have it as well. After lunch, he and his little cousin went over to his home. They sat down in the living room and Ben showed him a few of his new toys. But then the big black screen caught his attention and he turned it on in order to watch cartoons. Sid sat there, tired and worn out from his grandparents' flat, and just stared at the colorful pictures of Japanese monsters that inhabited the screen and caught Ben in their spell. Sid's gaze wandered across the room and fell onto a photo of Ben's father in a shiny, brand new picture frame. Sid remembered his last visit, when his infant cousin Maya, who had just learned to stand on 2 feet, had walked up to it, had taken it, had begun to run across the room, until she had fallen down and the frame had shattered on the floor next to her. Her father had died almost a year ago by now, due to a sudden heart attack at the age of 40, before her brain had developed its long-time memory. She would only remember her father from pictures like the one she had broken. Ben, on the other hand, had a very strong memory of his father, but since he had died, he had begun to lose himself in the colorful dream worlds the screen delivered to him every day. He had not cried about it, at least to his mother's knowledge, and talked about it in a way as if he did not really mind. But Sid remembered how he had shown him a picture he had to draw in his religion class of Noah's Ark. And when Sid had asked him to tell him about it, he had told him that God made it rain until everyone drowned. "Who is this God?" Sid asked, and Ben said, "He lives up in the sky, but I don't believe in him anymore. He let my father die, and for that I now don't believe in him anymore."